All right, next slide.
This is a portrait of our father, Gonzalo, who was...
Speaking of handsome men, too.
Yeah, well, I was there that day, and he did not want to pose. He said, I'll give you half an hour. And Bruno did that in half an hour.
Wow.
He planted the entire thing down.
He didn't want to do, like, take photographs. He wanted to do it real.
No, he never worked from photographs.
All right, Nude, 1988, page 89.
Here he was already beginning to look more at the canvas and the model. He would go and draw after the figure. He would come home, and late at night he would sort of reconstruct. He wanted to do something not overly imitative. He wanted to make a construction of a form using these drawings he had done.
Next slide. Take a look at this one. Another still life.
Yeah, this
Of
is another
form,
still life.
1988.
For me, that reminds me of the dark still lifes that we painted in Barcelona.
So mysterious.
But just that the life of those objects, it's where he discovered painting. And I think part of our training was discovering abstraction in the model, not elsewhere.
Next slide.
This is a detail, the part of which is also the cover of our book. This was a piece of wood that Bruno found on the streets of New York. The red, the black, and the white was already painted. He brought it home, and then he just added that graffiti to it that made it the side of an ocean liner. And so Bruno had a talent for modifying found objects as well.
Next slide.
This is, he would later attack the subject of a still life from many different angles. Here he had already left the model behind, and he would just arrange invented objects in a more imagined plane. So he was slowly freeing himself from looking at the model. He was looking more at the canvas and the palette than the model.
Next slide.
Bruno also did sculpture. This is this limestone piece. He would find stone on the streets and bring it home, and he called these 4 forms. And I said, but there are only 3. He said, look in the middle, that black form, he said. So,
next one.
Bruno loved Rome, and he loved the subject, as Edmund said, of the Castel Sant'Angelo.
Right.
He painted that at least 10 times in various
What did he
forms.
love?
I think, well, this is a painter who said he wanted to paint the Pope.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was specifically thinking of the current Pope, but he was thinking of Velázquez's portrait of the Pope. I think Rome had a certain grandeur to him, and it's a great subject.
Next is Theater, 1982.
Bruno also wanted to do public works and projects, and this was a cement cast model for a public works project that he had on the desk of the urban commissioner of Barcelona for several years, where it's still today, probably.
Okay, next, Edmund, tell me about the war murals. The first one is...
Well, I think all 4 of the war murals, I mean, this one's a tank, but it's a strange kind of tank. When you begin to look at the tank closely, you see that it really looks more like the Castel Sant'Angelo than a tank. I mean, that he's discovered this strange form. But, I mean, these are paintings, these 4 paintings that were inspired by the wars around the collapse of communism, weren't they?
Yeah.
And was he watching a lot of television?
I think he saw some pictures in the Herald Tribune, made some sketches, was inspired by that epic, but I think primarily he wanted to attempt a historical painting.
Exactly. It gave him a way into the great narrative painting that he'd always loved, and linked him, you know, without pomposity, I mean, with genuine striving to Tintoretto and Tiepolo and the painters that he'd always...
He had a real dialogue with those he said they're masters because they call them masters because they can teach.
Next slide.
Yeah.
These are enormous paintings. They were by far the biggest.
What size?
15 feet by 8 feet, and Bruno literally rolled them up, painted them in 3 different countries. He arrived by train in Italy, where I was staying, with these canvases bending behind him. He unrolled them on my floor and was working on them. He showed up in New York with them. I mean, it was really a...
Okay, next slide.
Again, this I think it's called Bucharest.
It is Bucharest, 1989.
Yeah.
But the events of the day were, as we've said, a pretext for a certain kind of painting, not such a literal response to those events.
And the closer you get in detail to these paintings, the more synthetic and abstract they become. Bruno wanted the 2 worlds, the abstraction and yet the evocation of these scenes to live simultaneously.
Yeah.
What do you hope comes out of this?
With this book, Bruno has a chance to live on his work. And you begin to see the brother and then his work goes on. just from the limited feedback that we've started to get, we see that independent of his family or even his physical presence, Bruno's work has a voice. And our hope is that it's heard.
Heard.
Yeah, it's heard and seen, perhaps.
How did this change you in your life? And
Well, I had no need for closure, if that's what you're meaning. That word comes up every now and then. It was just further communion with Bruno. I mean, it goes on. I think about him all the time anyway. This is one of the ways in which we think about him. The time of his death, we decided not to have a memorial because we just didn't feel like celebrating anything. It didn't seem that there was anything to be so happy about. But we knew that there would come a time when there was, and his memorial is his work. And in some ways, it's been helpful to realize that the work and the life are not the same things. And furthermore, that the work is in a way, for every artist, I think, the best and the most true of the person, the best expression of their qualities. And that's not a very obvious thing to understand. I mean, it sounds perhaps as a truism, but it was felt true for the first time, seeing the work laid out and releasing it for others to discover. That's the only point of doing it, just so it's there for maybe one person to discover.
And for me, as his colleagues, also that in the end, the work is one's autobiography. Ultimately, that is the autobiography.
Listen, I talk to people all the time, about artists all the time. And in the end, that's what they always say to me. In the end, as much as you will learn from a conversation with me, in the end, I'm in the work, whether it's music, or painting, or novels, or whatever it might be. The best expression of me is in my work. This book is called Bruno Fonseca, The Secret Life of Painting. We have told you the story of an artist with great promise and performance as well, who, because of the love of his brother and his sister and his family, lives. Thank you. Thank you, Ed.